Welcome to the ISO Show, dispelling myths and sharing tips for success to improve your business with ISO standards, with your host, Mel Blackmore.
Hello and welcome to the ISO Show. I'm delighted that Lucille Ryan from Informa, who's a sustainability manager for EMEA, is joining us on the ISO Show today to talk about her experience of managing sustainable events and the ISO standard for sustainable events, ISO 2012-1. Before I introduce Lucille, I'll just start by giving a bit of background to 2012-1. So the standard was created by the events industry for the events industry, and it's applicable to any size of organisation that either runs or hosts events. And it's for those that wish to improve sustainability of the events that they run. The standard itself simply provides a framework to establish an event sustainable management system, which not only helps to reduce the negative impacts of events, but also helps to capitalise on the more positive impacts through improved planning and processes. So Lucille, she's actually working for an organisation which is called Informa, it actually merged with UBM about a year ago, and it's now the world's leading exhibitions organiser, with over 4,500 employees delivering over 550 events across the globe. And typically that's in more than 40 countries at a time. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Lucille Ryan. Hello, Lucille.
Hi.
Great. Thanks very much for joining us. Could you tell us something about you that not many people know to begin with?
I think, maybe that I do dressmaking. I'm nowhere near as good enough to be on the sewing bee, but I do really... I really enjoy coming up with a concept for a piece of clothing and finding the material and making them. It's how I like to escape on a weekend and spend my time sewing. I really enjoy being able to wear something that I've made.
Oh, excellent. That's good. It's really grown in popularity now, hasn't it?
Yeah,
I think
it has.
Following on from the sewing bees. In fact, in our local town, we've got a shop now called the Sewing Bee.
Oh, really?
And you can go along and, just hire a machine by the hour and get advice and guidance on making whatever you want to make. So I think I do a little bit myself actually, and it is extremely satisfying. It's just getting the time though, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be quite complicated and stressful when it goes wrong, but it's really rewarding when you have a piece that you've made. It's lovely.
Great. And very sustainable as well, I would imagine, making your own items of clothing.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it could be recycled material that you've used for other projects, I suppose.
Yeah, I am actually linking it back to events. We have a design show and I spotted some incredibly expensive material going in a skip, and I did actually get it out and make a skirt out of it. It was, the material itself was worth more than £100 a metre, so I was straight in that dumpster to get it out.
Yeah. Great. Well, that's what it's all about, really, isn't it? And I'm sure we'll be delving into how organisations can act sustainably. And I think that obviously many view it as some of the negative aspects of running events, but I think it'd be really good to talk about some of the positive aspects later on within the show. So could you just explain a little bit more about what Informa does, please?
Yeah, so like you mentioned, Informa's, it's a big company. We're 50 now, and there's a few different arms to the company. There's the exhibitions arm, which I kind of came to from the UBM side with the merger last year, and we're biggest B2B events organiser, typically big exhibitions. So if you're familiar with the UK, it's big exhibitions at NEC and Excel and Olympia for the business area. But those events range all the way to very bespoke conferences as well. We have a big conference arm, and also publishing is what we do as well, of quite niche publications for different industries globally, as well as business intelligence. But I think what brings all of those different arms together is that we're a provider of specialist knowledge for businesses.
So what kind of industries, so you mentioned design obviously being one of them, but what other kinds of industries do you provide events and media publications for?
I think it's pretty much every industry. There's a lot. I think ones that I've enjoyed working with, we have fashion shows in America that I work with. We have architecture shows through to, we've got a big pharmaceutical portfolio. Maritime, so from everything from luxury yachts to shipping container shows. I think World of Concrete is another one we have, through to World of Tissue. It's through to jewellery fairs. So the real great benefit is that, from my point of view, is I get to see all of these different industries and to understand what sustainability means for the industries we serve as well, not just only the events industry and what sustainability means for them.
Yeah, it must be a fascinating industry to work in because, as you say, it's so varied. I mean, going from one industry to the next, it is so varied, isn't it? But obviously the theme for you is running sustainable events in all of those sectors. So actually I could see this having a bit of a knock-on effect for those industries themselves, which can only be a positive thing.
And it is something we really focus on, actually. When we talk about what a sustainable event means for us, we put it into three main aims. There's running an environmentally responsible event and running a socially responsible event. And that's our responsibility as an event organizer and how we want to make our industry sustainable. But the third pillar that we focus on a lot is inspiring sustainable development. And our events, are there to help those industries. And a part of that is how can we help them to be more sustainable? And that's helping their future of that industry and how can we be the platform for that to be developing. So it's actually increasing more and more that we're looking at that of how as a main part of how we deliver sustainable events.
Excellent. Whilst we're on the subject of sustainable events, then let's go straight into the standard ISO 2012-1. So this was a standard that actually started out as a British standard, BS 8901, back in 2009, which was when we first got involved with it at Blackmores, and we were implementing that for events companies and venues that hosted events. But we found it wasn't really until the Olympic Games in 2012, that was hosted in London, of course, that the standard really made its mark, and that seemed to be the catalyst for the sustainable event standard. And I think it's really helped push the topic of sustainability to the top of events management companies' agendas, which has only got to be a good thing.
Yeah.
And but I think that a lot of people think that it's just about environmental management. But as you said, Lucille, it's really interesting how you picked up on those three themes, wasn't it? On not just environmental management.
No, and I think that's what's really, driven us to see the benefits of ISO 2012-1 rather than any other standard. For us, I think it is, you said it was a standard for the events industry, by the events industry, and I think it is quite unusual for an industry to have such a specific one for them. When you look at ISO 14001, etc., it's for everyone. And it does benefit us that it is quite so for us. It very much goes into details of event management and how that is applicable. But it's also the benefit of it being sustainability in the broader term. And that's what really attracted us to it, because that's how it fits in so very well with our company's strategy that, sustainability isn't just environmental management. It's actually the whole purpose of the event and what our impact is of the event and why it exists, both economically, socially, environmentally. And the standard actually does allow you to look at that whole range of sustainability.
So what was the main driver for implementing a sustainable event management system then, Lucy?
I think looking back to when we started, we first gained the ISO 2012-1 in 2013. We'd been working on it for a few years before then, knowing that it was just about to be launched. And I think back then it was really that we were very much just starting out on this. And we needed the structure that the system provided. I think that was really what it really gave us at the beginning. It really set out what we should look at and what processes we would have in place. And I think, from having done initiatives and having things in place, having the standard really took us to a different level of having quite a bit of rigor in what we were doing.
So why choose ISO 2012-1? Because you mentioned that there have been some other sustainable events initiatives and programs and that sort of thing around, but What do you think it was about ISO 2012 that stood out for you?
I think it's the structure and the process that it then leads us to go through with each of the event teams. I think over the years, we've probably taken around 22 of our events through the process of gaining ISO 2012-1. And I think it really gives them the focus and the platform to be able to really think about their sustainability and go through that process of looking at what is their issues, what is their priorities, really giving them the space to think about what that means for their event. And then it guides them through setting objectives and being able to track that progress year on year. And that structure really enables them to deliver continual improvement. We've seen every show that we've gone through this process with that, every year it's a real step change in what they're achieving sustainability wise. I think having the standard as well keeps us all on our toes. We have about 8 days of auditing each year. And I think knowing that you have that, it pushes us on all the time to making, that we are achieving more and more. And it also, if Paul, our auditor from yourselves is coming, that it does keep us on the toes, that everything is always in order. And I think having that system is beneficial.
And I guess because of the size of the organisation, it's a scalable model as well, isn't it? So you mentioned that you've done this for about 22 events. I remember a few years ago you started out with just a couple of events. So I didn't realise how it had expanded so much, which is fantastic. So has that helped that you've had a kind of a more, I guess, systematic approach rather than each country and each event doing their own thing? Has that helped from an overall management perspective?
Definitely. I think going through the standards, I think if you catch the ISO management system bug, it really kind of makes you realise how having a proper plan and process in place, it's just absolutely fundamental to getting things rolled out in a structured and consistent way. And even though we say we've done 20 through the standard over the years, we currently have around 12 actually in certification at the moment. We're actually in the process of launching this for all of our events in the next month. So we've taken everything we've learned from the standard and making our own version of it really internally that we're going to be asking all 550 of our events to be following. And that's really come from the standard.
Wow.
We're not going to have all 550 certified, unfortunately. We can't get there yet. But the idea is that we're putting that system and all of the benefits that it delivers on a much bigger scale now.
That's fantastic. So could you describe some of the benefits then of using the standard for running your events? You have mentioned some of the benefits more broadly in terms of, being fundamental in having those systems in place. But could you give us examples of any potential savings that have been made or, just any other benefits that you can think of?
Yeah, I think you mentioned savings, and it is something that it has led to that, having delivered sustainability for our shows. We did a study actually of tracking cost savings for about 15 of our shows over a 3-year period, and we saw about £1 million worth of savings, which really through being able to have efficiencies, through reducing our waste, by looking at our energy usage, by even kind of realising that this is what our exhibitors are wanting, and we're kind of having new sponsorships around sustainability initiatives that we can partner with our exhibitors to deliver. So it is delivering on that side as well, which is important to the business. But it's also helping with the purpose of the event and the story of what we're delivering by being able to sit down with the teams and to talk about our social, environmental and how we're inspiring sustainable development really enables them to look at what we can be adding into our shows to make them both interesting and what we're providing, but also making sure that this is what we're delivering, what our customers are wanting. We've done a number of surveys and we get back that about 80% of our customers expect us to be delivering sustainable events. So that really is an important driver for why we need to be doing this as a company as well.
I think it's quite phenomenal in terms of the cost savings and the fact that you've got those quantifiable results from having that system in place, because a lot of organisations don't really monitor and measure the costs associated with waste and the potential savings that could be made. So obviously, apart from just doing the right thing and acting responsibly as far as sustainable event management is concerned, it sounds as though it has an impact on the bottom line in terms of cost savings as well. So could we just delve in a little bit deeper into the standards and its impacts and provide an example of some sustainability initiatives that you've introduced then this year?
So as I mentioned before, we have the three main areas that we break what sustainable events mean. And the first one is inspiring sustainable development. And within this, it's looking at how can we both inspire our internal teams, our exhibitors, our visitors to help with the sustainable development of the actual event. So within this, we have our exhibitor sustainability checklist, or we share information with all of our visitors on how they can be more sustainable while they're at their events, such as promoting how they can bring their own coffee cups to receive money off buying coffee at the show. But actually, the really exciting bit is how we can actually use the event itself to deliver sustainable development for that industry. And this is initiatives such as holding sustainable innovation awards for that industry. You know, one of our shows is a pharmaceutical packaging show. So we have as one of our categories, sustainable packaging awards. And that's really trying to help that industry look at that issue. It very much differs for each industry what the main issue is for what they need to look at. So for some of our industries, it's looking at the talent coming through. So we partner with universities to run competitions for new talent and university students that is then showcased on the show floor. And we have judging panels, and, you know, we've got a few schemes where they then get an internship at a big company at the end of it by going through that process. There's so many different ways that we can partner with different organisations to help those industries address the issues that they have. On the more environmental side, it's looking at how we run an environmentally responsible event. And one of the things we were really excited about last year was that we switched all of our European shows over to renewable energy, which made a huge difference to our carbon impact. It was something we were very much excited about. Other things, I think everyone thinks about waste when they think about an event, and it is something that we've had to look at very carefully. You know, our events exist for 3 days, but historically, events have been designed very disposable. Even to stands, which you would feel be the size of some people's houses, would just be thrown away after those 3 days. It's a big issue that we're needing to look at as an industry. And we've started by looking at how we build what we are responsible for as the organiser. And we have the target for all of what we build to be waste-free. And we're nearly there within Europe on that target. And that's by working with our contractors really carefully to take it absolutely back to the design point of really thinking about how are we doing this? How can we build this in a way that we're not creating waste? And we've been able to do that for the majority of our shows. And it's a good example, actually, is at a show called IFSEC that is hosted in London. The registration areas had always been disposable, which is quite shocking that desks would be completely thrown away after the end of a show, but that was what was standard practice and there wasn't any alternative. So we worked with our contractors to find a solution for that. And we've made, in partnership with them, a modular system for that now, so that our desks for all of our events won't be thrown away. And now that they have that as a stock item, it's not just us as an organiser that's now using them, but other organisers now can hire those items and use them. So it's that kind of ripple effect of once you solve a problem, now actually it's rippling across the events industry of other people can also prevent that waste as well.
Yeah, but you mentioned about this ripple effect. So I think a lot of organisations might think that a sustainable event management system is just about the direct impact of the events that they're running, but it seems to be so much more than that, doesn't it? And so it's not just the direct environmental impact, it's the indirect repercussions of acting responsibly. And you mentioned about partnerships and the relationships that you have with your suppliers. It sounds to me as well as though the organisation's revolutionising, I know it's a big word to use there, but revolutionising the actual life cycle of sustainable events. As you mentioned, going right back to design of equipment and materials that are used at each event and how that could potentially be reused rather than just going into landfill. So I did a bit of background research on the organisation before the interview, and I was really impressed to see that the organisation, Informa, has actually received 45 distinctions from a variety of industry networks at various awards just in the first quarter alone of 2019. And I was thinking, crikey, that's pretty impressive. But listening to the examples that you've given, Lucille, I can see why. And it seems to me as though it's just not taking running events as standard. It is about being innovative in your approach and the influence that you have with the organisations
and
you
I think
work with.
It's an important part of the standard, of how you work with your stakeholders and how you work with your supply chain. And it's really to get those changes that we need to happen, that you need to be working with all of those partners on the supply chain, from signage through to stand designs, through to working with your exhibitors and how you can partner with them to make those changes. It really is, you can't do this in silo. And I think that's a great thing that the standard also very much encourages you to do and kind of shows you where the worth of that is.
Obviously, you've been on this journey.
Sorry, I realised I didn't get to the third pillar of what we look at for our events.
Yes, carry on.
We got sidetracked by talking about our design, it is something we focus very heavily on, but I just wanted to touch upon how the third pillar of how we run our events in a socially responsible manner as well, which is a key part of the standard of how it's not just environmental. And within this, we look at well-being, we look at our local impact that the event has, and we look at our governance. And some of the examples that we could share on here is things like even just providing water refilling stations at our events, through to having community activities such as yoga. It's not for all of our events, I admit.
I'll be at that one. You'll have to let me know what that one is after.
But making sure that our events have that community and that networking, and it can be in different settings, such as a lot of our events have yoga sessions in the morning now and water refilling stations, and really thinking about the well-being of people when they're actually on site with us. It also goes through to about accessibility and how we're making sure that our events are welcoming, a whole range of people. And that goes right through to even the programs I mentioned about universities, and how we're making sure we're drawing in a whole range of people to the events, as that also kind of builds to the richness of the content that the event is talking about. It also leads us to be looking at issues such as diversity and equality. I think within the events industry, it's always a topic around the makeup of panels and issues such as that. And it's also the local impact and what we have on the local community around our events and the initiatives we have in place to help mitigate that. Sometimes if we're in a very inner city location, the amount of transport that comes to our events can have a knock-on effect on the air quality. So we work very closely to bring in systems that mitigate that. Everyone gets a time slot for a number of our events, meaning that no one's queuing with their lorry, but they arrive and they can go again without getting into a traffic jam. And it's all these kind of things that we also take into account on how we should and how we can deliver a sustainable event.
So I think those examples that you gave, obviously they're describing the socially responsible part of the three pillars, but it also sounds as though it's a great way of really listening to your stakeholders and delivering what they need, from a commercial sense. If they're having a great experience, either as a visitor, as an exhibitor, or a supplier, it sounds as though the whole customer experience from all angles is enhanced because you're really listening to what their needs are and making everything as accessible and as enjoyable as possible when they're involved with dealing with your organisation. So could you just share with us some of your experience of implementing the standard? And I'd be quite interested to hear about some of the challenges along the way, because I know that making changes within any organisation can be difficult in some cases. Could you explain about your experience of implementing the standard and some of the barriers you might have come across and how you potentially overcame them?
I think with the standard, if you've never worked with a standard before, they can seem a bit daunting when you first open up the document. I think, it's looking at it and understanding what it's asking you to do and the why behind it. And I think what I've really learned is that the process that it leads you to have in place is really worthwhile in the end. It does give you that structure that really enables you to deliver that sustainable, continued development. I think it really kind of makes you realize you need to start at the beginning. You really need to identify what your issues are and then kind of following through that process so that everything really does link to each other, that it is a thought through plan. And I think, once you've kind of got that in your head of that's how you want to do it, it's very hard to ever get away from that. You want to have that structure and plan because you really understand how important it is. And I think that's what I've really learned from having worked with the ISO 20121 for the last 8 years, that it really is necessary that you start at the beginning and you follow through that process from identifying your issues through to setting a plan, through to setting objectives, through to making sure you actually are tracking your progress, and that feeds into how you readdress what your objectives are each year. It sounds really simple, but it really does work. And once you've bought into realizing that, it's hard to move away from how good that is.
So did you find that you had any challenges along the way whilst you were going through that process
I think it's been around 8 years that we've done this, and I think people's understanding of sustainability in regards to all of our stakeholders has developed and matured so much over that time. I think even what we look at now is very different to what we looked at 8 years ago. And I think both our stakeholders, such as our internal senior management, through to the event teams themselves, through to our suppliers, we've all come on that journey together to understanding why it is so beneficial.
Yes, I guess 8 years ago it would have been a lot more challenging than, say, today, when I think earlier you mentioned that on one of the surveys that your organisation had done, about 80% of stakeholders expected you to have some degree of sustainability as part of the management of your events. So I think it's more of an expectation now, isn't it? Rather than 8 years ago when it may have been a bit of a struggle. I think nowadays people tend to come to expect that you're acting responsibility as an organisation and sustainable events.
I think everyone's come along that journey of understanding where now when I'm working with event teams, the event teams aren't kind of having that question of why are we doing this? They really see the benefit of how we should do this. And actually, I was talking to one of the latest shows to gain the ISO 20121 a month ago. We were talking to them thinking we would gain it for 2020. And they said, no, actually, we want this. We really want this. Can we do it this year? So where maybe 8 years ago, we needed to have more of the conversation of, no, this will benefit you and trust us, this is going to be really good for you. Now people really want it and they understand that what it will deliver for them.
Great. So if you could leave us with a top tip for anybody that's looking at implementing the standard, what would it be, Lucy? I think you have mentioned a few along the way about starting at the very beginning, but if you could leave us with a top tip, that would be great.
I think for me, when there's a bit of the standard that you struggle with and you're thinking, oh, why do I need to do this? And you're kind of getting into the headset of making sure you have the right document, but just to be able to tick it off. I think when people get into that mindset, that's when they just don't see the benefit of what a standard will deliver for them. And I think that's because, yes, you're doing what would be needed to pass the audit, but you've not really thought about why is the standard asking you to do that? What is it trying to get you to? What is the purpose of it asking you to do that? And once you really think about that, you then can actually make sure that it's delivering what it needs to do, and I think doing that, it really means that you are getting the benefit of the standard, not just the tick box. And I think understanding the why of each of the steps, they're all in there for a reason, and they all do actually really give you a great benefit when you're actually implementing it properly. But sometimes it's just going back to the why and making sure you're delivering that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, I've really enjoyed our conversation. And I think for me, obviously, I'm familiar with the standard, but it's been fantastic to hear about the far-reaching impacts of the standard, both, for your organisation and other stakeholders involved. So thank you very much for sharing that.
It's been great to talk to you about it.
So just finally, just to end on one last question, if you could gift a book to someone, what would it be and why?
It's probably not as a meaningful choice as I should have come up with, but for me, it's Terry Pratchett. And it's one of the ones with Commander vibes in for me. I think that's what I would always give someone, because they're just a set of books that have brought me so much enjoyment over the years. I always go back to Terry Pratchett's. I just love his wit and his interesting commentary, even though it's fantasy. It's a really great, interesting commentary on the world. So I would pass it on, hoping it would bring someone else as much joy as they have to me as well.
Great, and escapism, I think that sounds as though, yeah, excellent. Once again, thanks very much, Lucille, for joining us today. If our listeners would like to find out a bit more about your organisation and some of those environmental and sustainable initiatives, where can they find you?
Yeah, I would say
where can they find that information?
Our sustainability report, we just released our latest one last month at informa.com sustainability. You will find our latest report, which goes into much more depth of loads of case studies of all the sustainability initiatives we have going on as a company. I've talked about our events today, which are heavily covered in there, but there's also all the other great things we have as a company in our other arms, such as our publications and our business intelligence as well. So it's an interesting read.
So we'll also include a link to that on our blog post that we'll be writing about this podcast show. So if listeners are listening to this in their car, they can just go onto that blog post and download the link to the website and the report from there. So thanks once again, Lucille. And